can't even tell you how devastated I was when I got that call. It was so hard.
The mother of two was appointed to the U.S. Senate after her brother, Republican Lindsey Graham, died suddenly this month from cardiovascular disease.
He loved his family and loved serving this state and our country. He dedicated his life to our country.
I feel an inner peace about it. Will it be difficult? Yes.
On the night of July 12th, 2026, emergency workers were called to Senator Lindsey Graham's home in Washington, D.C. Hours later, one of America's most recognizable political figures was gone. But in the days that followed, the headlines shifted from politics to a question Lindsey Graham had spent decades avoiding. Why did he never marry or have children? The answer was not hidden in a scandal or a rumor. It was revealed by the woman he raised as his own, and who would soon be sworn into his Senate seat. So, join us as we uncover the full story of Lindsey Graham and the truth about why he never got married. The two kids in the back room of the bar. Lindsey Graham's life did not begin in Washington, D.C., or in any of the television studios where he spent decades making arguments, cracking jokes, and occasionally switching positions in ways that kept the political media in a permanent state of mild whiplash. It began in central South Carolina in a bar. His parents ran an establishment called the Sanitary Cafe, a restaurant and pool hall in Central. They all lived in a small room behind the bar, and Lindsey once described his upbringing in his memoir as growing up in the back room of a South Carolina bar, sharing a bathroom with patrons who worked down the street at a nearby mill plant, and taking baths with water heated up on the stove. The American dream, as he was experiencing it, came with very specific plumbing limitations. His sister Darlene was born 9 years after him. With 9 years between them, they were not siblings in the conventional sense of shared childhood playmates. By the time Darlene was forming her earliest memories, Lindsey was already a teenager. By the time she was in elementary school, he was heading to the University of South Carolina, the first member of his family to attend college. When Lindsey was 20 years and Darlene was 11, they lost their mother, Millie, to Hodgkin's lymphoma in 1976. Their father, Floyd, was still alive, and for a brief stretch of time, the family restructured around his presence. Then, in 1977, 15 months after their mother died, 13-year-old Darlene came home and found her father unconscious. He had suffered a heart attack in his sleep. Lindsey Graham was in his first year of law school at the University of South Carolina when the tragedy occurred. Both of their parents were gone within 15 months of each other. And in the living room of that house, standing with a 13-year-old girl who had just discovered her father's body, a 22-year-old law student made a decision that would define the next decade of his life and, according to his sister, answer the question that everyone kept asking about why he never married. He became her legal guardian. He later adopted her formally when she was 13. He raised her while simultaneously attending law school and beginning the early stages of what would become a 30-year political career. He taught her to ride a bicycle. He showed up to the things a father shows up to. He was, as Darlene has described it in multiple interviews, always her parent. So what does Darlene say when people actually ask her directly why her brother never married? What Darlene said and what it changed? The rumors about Lindsey Graham's unmarried status followed him from his earliest days in politics and never fully went away. They arrived in various forms and from various directions across his career. Comedians made jokes. Political opponents made implications. Journalists asked questions in ways that contained their own assumptions. Lindsey himself addressed it with a combination of self-deprecating humor and occasional genuine frustration of having to answer the same question so many times. He wrote in his 2015 memoir, "I've never married. I guess I attribute that to timing, too. The opportunity never presented itself at the right time, or I never found time to meet the right girl, or the right girl was smart enough not to have time for me. I haven't been lucky that way, but I have a family." The clearest public answer to the marriage question was not given by Graham himself. It was given by his sister in an interview with the New York Times. Darlene Graham Nordone, described by the Times as a mother of two whose occupation is helping people with disabilities find jobs, said plainly, "He was a young man taking on a young girl and teenager to raise. He was just dedicating all of that time to raising me and going to school and trying to get an education. There's just only so much time in a day." That answer, delivered by the woman who lived the reality that the question was really about, is both simple and sufficient. A 22-year-old man was simultaneously attending law school and raising a 13-year-old. The available hours in a day did not include meeting a potential spouse, developing a relationship, getting engaged, planning a wedding, and building a life alongside all of the other things he was managing. Time had already been allocated. Lindsey came close to marriage once. He revealed in his memoir that while stationed in Europe with the Air Force in the 1980s, he had considered proposing to a Lufthansa flight attendant he was dating. He never did. He described it without apparent regret, as something that simply did not happen at the moment when it might have happened. By the time he was building the political career that would eventually carry him to the United States Senate, the rhythms of his life were already set in a particular direction, and that direction did not include a domestic partnership. The rumors persisted anyway. Now, here is the part of the story that most coverage of his personal life consistently glossed over. The sister he raised did not just succeed in a general sense. She built a meaningful professional life that had nothing to do with her brother's world, and everything to do with what she chose to do with the experience of growing up the way she did. So who exactly is Darlene Graham Nordone when she is not standing next to her brother at campaign events? Uncovering Darlene Graham. During Lindsey Graham's presidential campaign in 2015 and 2016, Darlene Graham Nordone appeared beside him at events and served a role that most candidates' campaigns handle through spouses. She introduced him at his campaign announcement. She shared stories of what their childhood had contained and what her brother had done for her. She was the warmth in a campaign that the press was covering primarily through the lens of his foreign policy positions and his habit of making jokes about his own bachelorhood. Darlene did her best to show Graham's softer side by sharing stories of how he taught her to ride a bicycle, and recalling the pain of losing both their parents, one after the other, at young ages. But Darlene Graham Nordone is not simply the biographical anchor of someone else's story. She is a person with her own life, her own career, and her own experience of the same losses that shaped her brother. She got married, had children, and eventually she had grandchildren. She built a professional career working with people with disabilities, specifically with the South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation Department, helping people with disabilities find employment. She has served as commissioner of the South Carolina Commission for the Blind since 2019. She serves on the South Carolina State Workforce Development Board and is the president of its Employment First Committee. The career she built was in direct service to people who faced the kinds of structural barriers and limited opportunities that she and her brother had navigated from the back room of a bar in central South Carolina. When she appeared at his campaign events, she was doing it because she believed in her brother, not because she was seeking proximity to his platform. The photographs from those events show a woman who is clearly proud and clearly uncomfortable with the attention simultaneously, which is precisely the profile of someone who showed up for a person they loved, rather than for a moment they wanted. She told NPR after their father's death, "It was hard when we lost my mom and dad. I can remember the day my father passed away, standing in the living room of that house, absolutely scared to death. And the 22-year-old standing in the same room decided, at that moment, that his job was to make sure she did not stay scared." That is the story that Darlene tells. That is the story that explains the bachelor senator from South Carolina, who joked about having a rotating first lady, and who said his sister's success was the highlight of his life by far. The two things are connected. They are the same story told from different angles. And when Lindsey died on July 12, 2026, the woman who had been his child, his sister, and his most consistent public advocate became, within 48 hours, a United States Senator. How did it happen? The night everything changed again. Lindsey Graham died on Saturday, July 12, 2026. He had returned from a trip to Ukraine earlier that day. President Trump had spoken with him by phone that evening and later said in a statement that the call could have been his last. Emergency workers were dispatched to his Capitol Hill home. The preliminary medical finding from the D.C. Medical Examiner's Office was aortic dissection due to atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. He was 71 years old. The news moved through the political world with the speed that the death of a prominent senator always generates, and with the additional dimension that Lindsey had been a figure of such long and complicated visibility that the responses ranged from genuine grief to political calculation to the already familiar resumption of the speculation that had followed him for decades. Within hours of the announcement of his death, the question of his successor was already being publicly discussed. Lindsey had just won the Republican Senate primary and was expected to win a fifth term in November. His death created a vacancy in a seat that had been his since 2003. South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster said he raised the question of the Senate seat with Darlene Graham Nordone on the Sunday morning after her brother's death. She accepted during what Henry described as an emotional conversation. Henry then publicly announced the appointment on Monday, July 13th. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina endorsed the appointment explicitly, saying, "There is no one better who understands Lindsey's love for family, our state, and our country." President Trump wrote on Truth Social that Darlene would be wonderful, and that the appointment would be a wonderful tribute to Lindsey, who loved her dearly. Henry McMaster's formal statement at the announcement press conference included a line that captured everything the relationship between the two siblings had been. "Lindsey took care of his little sister in years long departed. It's my honor to ask his little sister, Darlene Graham, to finish his work for him now." Darlene Graham. Nordone's response was equally direct. "Lindsey has always been there for me, and now I will be there for him." She was sworn in on Tuesday, July 14, 2026, becoming the first woman to represent South Carolina in the United States Senate. But while Darlene has consistently described the bond she had with her brother and why he never got married, it never stopped dark rumors from surfacing. So, what are these rumors? The rumors and deflections. The rumors about Graham's sexuality followed him from his early years in the Senate and never fully stopped, regardless of how many times he addressed them or how directly. They were driven primarily by the fact of his bachelorhood and by the cultural moment in which a conservative Southern Republican who had never married existed as a public figure. The combination was, for a certain portion of the political media ecosystem, irresistible. Lindsey addressed it in his memoir directly. "To the extent that it matters, I'm not gay." He pushed back publicly when the comedian Chelsea Handler posted a crude insinuation about him on social media. He did not engage with it extensively or pursue legal action. He treated it with the combination of measured public denial and private irritation that a person applies to accusations they have decided are not worth organizing their life around. His public humor about the situation was often more interesting than his serious responses. During his short-lived 2016 presidential campaign, when asked what role his family would play if he was elected president, he said he had a sister and a lot of friends, and that there would be a rotating first lady. He made the bachelorhood into a punchline before anyone else could make it into something worse, which is a defense mechanism that requires a level of self-awareness and comedic timing that his critics frequently underestimated. He was usually the one telling the joke. That dynamic, the subject of the speculation controlling the frame of the conversation by getting there first, is a form of political sophistication that often gets overlooked in discussions of Graham's legacy because the policy positions and the procedural maneuvering tended to generate more coverage. His former campaign consultant, Bob McAllister, described Lindsey's relationship to his own background in terms that put the marriage question in context. He grew up with nothing. The back of the bar where he and his sister grew up was always kind of top of mind to him. A man for whom the back of the bar was always top of mind is a man who understood, from a very early age, the cost of obligation and the weight of being responsible for another person. He carried that understanding into everything he did. The rumors that followed him for 30 years were answered, as they had been answered many times over many years, by the woman who was in the room when the answer was first decided. He was raising her. That is why he did not have time. That is what there was instead of a wife. And the measure of whether that was a tragedy or not is visible in the photograph of Darlene Graham Nordun being sworn in as a United States Senator in her brother's place, the first woman ever to hold that seat. The inherited Senate legacy. On July 14, 2026, Darlene Graham Nordun stood inside the United States Senate chamber and took the oath of office from Vice President J.D. Vance. It was a moment few people in South Carolina had ever imagined seeing. Darlene was stepping into the seat once held by her brother, Senator Lindsey Graham, following his sudden death just days earlier. Her appointment was temporary, lasting until January 3, 2027, when the new Congress was scheduled to convene. In the meantime, South Carolina prepared for a special Republican primary on August 11, 2026, to decide which candidate would appear on the November ballot for a full 6-year Senate term. But Darlene's swearing in was about more than politics. It was a historic milestone for the state. She became the first woman ever to represent South Carolina in the United States Senate. For many people, that fact alone made the moment unforgettable. Darlene's background is very different from her brother's. Lindsey Graham built his career through law, military service, and decades in national politics. Darlene, on the other hand, spent much of her professional life working in disability services and workforce development. Her work focused on helping people find support, opportunities, and a path toward greater independence. At campaign events, Darlene often spoke about her brother's concern for people who were struggling or in need of help. Those stories showed a side of Lindsey Graham that was not always visible in political debates or television interviews. While their careers followed different paths, they shared a common belief in serving others. Lindsey Graham's death also created major questions in Washington. He had been one of the most influential voices in American foreign policy for many years, especially on issues involving Ukraine. On the day he died, he had been traveling in Ukraine, and reports from the country expressed concern about losing a strong supporter in the United States Senate. Because of his long career, Lindsey left behind a complicated political legacy. People immediately began debating his influence on foreign policy, national security, and the Republican Party. Historians and political analysts will likely discuss those issues for years to come. Yet the most personal part of his legacy is much simpler. For decades, many people speculated about Lindsey Graham's private life and his decision never to marry. But Darlene explained that his bachelorhood was not some great mystery. It was connected to the responsibility he had taken on within his family. Now, the woman he helped raise is sitting in the Senate seat he once occupied. After everything that has happened in the last week, what part of this story about Lindsey Graham and Darlene surprised you the most? Was it truly the responsibility of taking care of his sister after his parents' death that kept him from getting married, or are there any hidden secrets? Share your answer in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.